pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Shawn the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. Here I am with another book haul. I keep feeling a need to say this is the second half of the books I bought in March, but who cares about that? This is just another book haul. So, here we go. Oh, and I wanted to start off by, these are not books, but I wanted to show you these. These are bookish magazines that were also part of the, in fact, this was the original trade with Chris Wolak of the fabulous bookish podcast, The Book Cougars. She put up a tweet about how much she was looking forward to reading these. And I said, without any ulterior agenda whatsoever, those look great. And she said, let me pop them in the mail to you. I said, really? I said, let me send you a book from Japan. So we did that, and when I got these magazines, so this one is Fine Books and Collections, and this one is World Literature Today, and she also threw in, I think it might, I'm not sure, it might be a local or bookstore magazine. It looks pretty interesting too. Book Page. Also was that Min Jin Lee book, Free Food for Millionaires, that I was delighted, rather emphatically delighted to see was signed. So that was, I wanted to show you those. All right. So the next batch are secondhand books and new books that I bought while book shopping that fabulous day with Ange of Beyond the Pages. So here are the used books. A novel by Kiran Desai, Hullabaloo in the Guava Orchard. You can see that shiny title. I had a book of hers on my shelf for years, and I got rid of it when I moved to Japan. She's supposed to be really good. She won the Booker Prize in 2006. The protagonist, Sampath Chawla, was born into a family a bit off kilter, to a mother not quite like her neighbors, in a town not quite like other towns. Well, my interest is piqued. Kiran Desai, of course, is an Indo-American writer, born in India, now lives in the States, I believe. First published in 1998. Just a reminder, I do like to share opening sentences or paragraphs if they have some kind of a standalone vitality, and the fact that a book doesn't turn me off of the book, but this one doesn't have that kind of a opening. Rosamund Lehman is a British writer that I have long wanted to try, and this is her novel, The Echoing Grove. It's a Penguin edition. It's a little bit of a reading bend to it, which a little bit of a cracked spine, but I figured for $6 or whatever, I would give it a try. First published in 1953. You know, maybe some of you are frustrated with me because I don't like telling you a whole bunch about the book. Almost never read the back cover. I don't like to know very much about books going in, and that's why I don't like some book hauls, because they say too much about it. I don't want to know too much about the plot, so I'm not telling you much about the plot. You can go to Goodreads for that. I do put the links in, and this one, when I scan it, it's about 3 characters. A man, his wife, and her sister. Directly, Madeline came to the door, Dinah said, without looking at her. "You've got the blue tubs." Well, I'd like to find out what that's all about. This was just a nice hardcover copy of Wuthering Heights. I want to reread it. I read it twice, but the last time was probably 1988 or 1985 or something, so I want to read it again, and this was just a nice hardcover edition. Every Pocket Classic. Will you recognize, can you quote the opening? I can't remember the opening sentence. 1801. I have just returned from a visit to my landlord, the solitary neighbor that I shall be troubled with. This is kind of a Bridget Brophy book haul. I picked up a novel by her, The King of a Rainy Country, because she has been on my radar since she was featured in The Book of Forgotten Authors by Christopher Fowler. She was already on my radar for another reason, and I will get to that later. Just I'm doing them in a certain order. It may not make sense in the way that I'm talking about Bridget Brophy, but too bad. So she's been on my radar, and I saw this at the used bookstore. First published in 1956. She is kind of an experimental writer. She has a cult following, but she's not popular. There's a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of very learned literary types. I think maybe even a son or daughter of hers that are championing her left, right, and center there. Terry Castle says Bridget Brophy was as stylish, meteoric, and morally apropos as her contemporaries Muriel Spark or Iris Murdoch. I don't see anything that says what this is about. The protagonist is Susan, a young woman of the post-war bohemian inclination, who lives with her not-quite boyfriend, Neil. She died in 1995, age 66, by the way. I'm looking forward to giving that a try. I think it was on my version of the African Writers tag recently that I mentioned Teju Cole and saying that I hadn't read anything he'd written, and this is his novel, Open City. He's a Nigerian American, and I believe this is his only novel. He's written essays and a bunch of other things. He's been in America since 1992, and I've heard nothing but great things about him. A Nigerian doctor wanders the streets of Manhattan, reflecting on his recent breakup, his present, and his past. With this one, I'm doing that thing that Simon Savage is always mildly chiding himself for doing, which is buying more than one book by an author that you haven't read yet. And so I already have a novel by Shashi Deshpande, and this is the second one I've bought. From the same used bookstore, in fact. This is called The Binding Vine. I have one of hers sitting on my shelf, unread. I featured it in that Indian buddy read video that I made a couple months ago. Deshpande was born in Dharwad, India, daughter of the renowned dramatist and Sanskrit scholar Shriranga. At the time of this publication, she lived in Bangalore. This was published by Virago Press in 1993. And it's about a young, sharp-tongued woman, Urmi, grieving over the death of her baby daughter. This is a classic of gay literature, and I bought a second copy because I found one that was in good shape. Dancer from the Dance by Andrew Holleran. I've talked about this multiple times. Fairly recently, was it on my top 10? My top 10 changes day to day, so on that day it might have been on my top 10. And I want to reread it because I read it in about I have no idea, 1990 maybe. It was published in 1978, I think. And I won't say any more than that. But I loved it, and it had a huge influence on me as a young gay man. I'm very curious to see what, if anything, it means to me as a slightly less younger gay man. There is a very interesting podcast from BBC, or no, The Guardian. Yes, it's a BBC Radio 4 podcast, and I don't listen to it regularly, but I listen to it when I have time, and I really enjoy it. It's called A Good Read, and they have usually two writers and the host, each of whom brings a book to the episode, and all three of them have read the other two's book, and they talk about each of the three books, and whether they like them or not. So each one brings a book they liked, and invariably at least one or the other two people hate it, so it can get pretty, not tense, but certainly a lot of disagreement, and I enjoy that. And on a recent episode, Maggie O'Farrell chose a novel that she loves by Barbara Trapido, Traveling Horn Player, and I had never heard of the novelist or the novel. And the other guest, who I'd never heard of, Tracy Thorne, she hated this book, and I can't remember if the host liked it or not, but poor Maggie O'Farrell was really trying to defend it. I was intrigued by what I heard, and so when I saw it in the used bookstore, I picked it up. The characters are a cellist, an adulterous man, and two high-spirited sisters. And it's a tragic comedy. Trapido was born in South Africa, came to London in 1963, and at the time of this printing, lived in Oxford. I have a feeling she's maybe no longer alive. I should check that. I'll put a link to that episode of the podcast in the show notes. If you haven't checked it out, I think you might enjoy it if you like people kind of arguing. Like, it's not heated arguments, but they're strong opinions. I like strong opinions. Have you noticed? She is still alive, according to Wikipedia. That's great. She is British, born in South Africa with German, Danish, and Dutch ancestry. Her birth name, I don't know if that's her maiden name, doesn't mention a husband. It just says she was born in 1941 as Barbara Schudeboom. Opening lines. Early on the morning of my interview, I woke up and saw my dead sister. I had not seen her for 3 years. Alrighty then. Hope it's not too ghosty, but what Maggie O'Farrell said about it intrigued me, so I will give it a try. Have any of you tried it? And the last one of the used book haul is a collection of Edna O'Brien stories, A Fanatic Heart. I did a short story by her as part of the Faber Stories series of discussion videos that Doris of All the Books and I are doing. I was quite intrigued by it and saw this like the same week or what, a week later, and snatched it up. I think that Edna O'Brien is a Shawn writer. I showed this during the Tipsy Chatty video that I filmed. I was the only tipsy one with Ange when she was here. But this is one that she and I are going to buddy read next year. And what a gorgeous softcover book. A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Naipaul. And just look at that. It's a Picador classic, and they always look kind of smart. But look at that cover. So I haven't, as I said that on that video, I haven't read any V.S. Naipaul. And he's supposed to be a really good writer, and it was a shitty human being. And the protagonist has been told since the day of his birth that misfortune will follow him, and so it has. Yeah, just gorgeous book. So here's the opening paragraph of the prologue. 10 weeks before he died, Mr. Mohan Biswas, a journalist of Sikkim Street, St. James, Port of Spain, was sacked. He had been ill for some... I shouldn't be laughing. Don't laugh, Shawn. Okay, let's start again. 10 weeks before he died, Mr. Mohan Biswas, a journalist of Sikkim Street, St. James, Port of Spain, was sacked. He had been ill for some time. In less than a year, he had spent more than 9 weeks at the Colonial Hospital and convalesced at home for even longer. When the doctor advised him to take a complete rest, the Trinidad Sentinel had no choice. It gave Mr. Biswas 3 months' notice and continued, up to the time of his death, to supply him every morning with a free copy of the paper. Well, I got a free paper at least, hey? And, of course, Ange gave me this book, a novel bookstore by Lawrence Kosey, as a gift, so I'm really looking forward to giving it a try. It's a Europa Editions, so the fact that Ange loved it, and it's from Europa, bodes well. She talked about it quite a bit. It's about a man or a person, somebody, who opens a bookstore with like 100 of his or her favorite novels, and then solicits lists of famous writers' 50 favorite novels and stocks them, and that's the only books in the bookstore. And there's a controversy that ensues from that. When I scan what's here on the inside cover, it looks like there is murder and mayhem that results from these literary choices. Oh my! Leah, we're buddy reading this. Maybe next year? Isn't that right? Didn't we agree to that? There's too many French names that I don't know how to pronounce in this short opening paragraph, so I will skip it, but that looks good. And I couldn't stop myself after reading The Known World as an ebook, audiobook combo, and it just obliterating me. I had to buy a hardcover copy, so this is it. The Known World by Edward P. Jones. One of the best books I've ever read. My number 3 on my top 10 list of all time. I will link to my review. I was still a bit tongue-tied for that review, but I did a not bad job of conveying how much deeply it affected me. 2003 novel about slavery in Virginia, focused through the unusual lens of characters who are slave-owning freed slaves. So they're freed slaves who own slaves themselves, and it's just magical. It's a long one, but what the hell, I'm going to read you the opening paragraph. It's 3/4 of a page. But the evening his master died, he worked again well after he ended the day for the other adults, his own wife among them, and sent them back with hunger and tiredness to their cabins. The young ones, his son among them, had been sent out of the fields an hour or so before the adults, to prepare the late supper and, if there was time enough, to play in the few minutes of sun that were left. When he, Moses, finally freed himself of the ancient and brittle harness that connected him to the oldest mule his master owned, all that was left of the sun was a 5-inch-long memory of red-orange, laid out in still waves across the horizon, between 2 mountains on the left and one on the right. He had been in the fields for all of 14 hours. He paused before leaving the fields, as the evening quiet wrapped itself about him. The mule quivered, wanting home and rest. Moses closed his eyes and bent down and took a pinch of the soil and ate it with no more thought than if it were a spot of cornbread. He worked the dirt around in his mouth and swallowed, leaning his head back and opening his eyes, in time to see the strip of sun fade to dark blue and then to nothing. He was the only man in the realm, slave or free, who ate dirt. But while the bondage women, particularly the pregnant ones, ate it for some incomprehensible need, for that something that ash cakes and apples and fatback did not give their bodies. He ate it not only to discover the strengths and weaknesses of the field, but because the eating of it tied him to the only thing in his small world that meant almost as much as his own life. Well, I forgot that that beautiful dirt-eating stuff was in that long opening paragraph. I knew it was in the first chapter, and that is just beautiful. And if you know the story, if you know the story, that is just 1,500 times more moving. So, yeah, please read this book. Whew. I bought most of the next batch of Faber 90 books, so I'll just quickly show them to you. I didn't get all of them. Amazon Japan only had, there's a couple of them they didn't have, so I'll track those down eventually. But I got A River in Egypt by David Means, Three Types of Solitude by Brian Aldiss, Sonny Liston Was a Friend of Mine by Tom Jones, The Shielding of Mrs. Forbes by Alan Bennett, Daughters of Passion by Julia O'Fallon, Terrific Mother by Laurie Moore. I read her Who Will Look After the Frog Hospital a year or so ago and absolutely loved it. Haven't read any of her stories. Flannery O'Connor's A Good Man is Hard to Find. So eventually Doris and I will be discussing all or most of those. Speaking of small books, I ordered Cyprian Ekwensi's Glittering City. He's a Nigerian novelist, and I hauled his novel just last week, Tagwanana. And I also picked up this from the Penguin Modern series, and this is a short story, Glittering City. I've heard several people on BookTube talk about it, but in particular it was Jacqueline of 6 Minutes for Me that sold me on this collection of short stories, Lot by Brian Washington. And so I pre-ordered it. One of the first times I've pre-ordered something, and it is a good idea because it does, it's been explained to me why it's a good idea, and that reason has gone out of my head, but for some reason it just helps the writer. So I pre-ordered it and got it the other day, and he is a, do I know for sure that he is a gay African-American writer? Maybe I don't know that. I have assumed that, not just by the rainbow on the cover. Why did Jacqueline say he was? He is from Houston. His Twitter profile says he describes this book of short stories as being about queer people of color running around Houston. So there you go. All right, remember I was talking about Bridget Brophy and that I had another book by her in this haul. And this is one that I featured on my 5-star prediction video, which was a lot more than a year ago that I filmed that. And one of the books that I filmed, and I'm not going to show you the physical book until later, because I want to keep you in suspense, but she wrote a biography of the gay British writer Ronald Furbank, and he was also featured in the Book of Forgotten Authors. And I have never read anything by Furbank, and I understand that his writing is not necessarily an easy read, but I'm curious to try it. But I found out just sometime before I made that video that Bridget Brophy, and this is how her name entered my consciousness, she wrote a biography of him that was not only a biography of Ronald Furbank, but was a passionate defense of the novel. I'm not sure the novel needs defending, but anyway, it's been described thusly from the back cover. Bridget Brophy seeks nothing less than a vindication of the eternal liveliness of fiction itself against the persistent rumors that it is dying or dead. Ronald Furbank is not famous. He wrote in the early 20th century. I'm seeing pictures here of him from 1917, 1905. So that was his time period. And he was openly gay. I've been intrigued by this novel ever since, and especially when I saw the cover, because the cover has a sketch of Furbank where he just looks like a gay Charlie Chaplin with his cane. But that edition seemed to be, and I'll put that up here, But when I go to Amazon or wherever I'm trying to wherever I was trying to find the book, because it's published by Dalkey Archives, and the edition that seems to be much more widely available is this boring cover. And usually when I order books like this from Amazon Japan, where they come from is Book Depository, and Book Depository refuses to confirm or deny what the cover or what particular edition of a book you're going to get. So finally, when I realized how long ago I had made that 5-star prediction video, I thought, I better just hold my nose, order the boring copy, because that's the one that was displayed on the Amazon page, and lo and behold, when it came, I got the one I wanted! Look at that! I love that little image of Furbank. And this is a chunkster of a biography. Holy smokes! It's almost 600 pages. So, in order to finally, I've got 2 more to read for that 5-star prediction video. This and the Kate Atkinson novel, the sequel to Life After Life, the name of which has gone out of my head, but those 2 chunksters to read, and then I can finally do a follow-up video before all the followers who saw the first one have died of old age. And lastly, just yesterday I went to the bookstore here in Tokyo and I picked up another book by Yuko Tsushima, Child of Fortune, translated from the Japanese by Geraldine Harcourt. Last year for Women in Translation Month, I read her novella Territory of Light and really, really liked it. And so I want to read more, and this is what I've got. It's about a rebellious, independent Japanese woman defying her family's wishes, bringing her 11-year-old daughter up as a single mom, and then after a casual affair, becoming pregnant again. That sounds fabulous. That is my book haul. Thanks for watching.